I used to think grow it once, eat it forever was a lie garden centers told to sell you something bigger next spring. Then I ripped out my third round of store-bought pepper starts in one summer and realized the problem wasn't my thumb, it was that nobody sells you the plants that actually stick around. 15 container vegetables on this list, and every single one of them is still producing after the annuals in your neighbor's yard have gone to the compost pile twice over. Number 4 on this list is a plant most garden centers won't even stock because it doesn't photograph well in a 6-pack tray, but it'll outlive your mortgage. Number 9 is one my grandmother grew in a half barrel on a concrete patio in Zone 5, and I still have a division of that exact plant. And stick around for number 13 because it's the one that turns a container garden from nice hobby into something you could actually feed a family from year after year with almost nothing going back into it. Starting the list, number 15. Egyptian walking onions. This one made the cut because it's the plant that plants itself, which sounds like a gimmick until you've actually grown one. Botanically, it's Allium times proliferum, hardy zones 3 through 9, and instead of flowering the way a normal onion does, it grows a cluster of small bulbils at the top of each stalk, dusty purple-green, papery, top-heavy enough that the whole stem eventually arcs over and plants them a foot or two away. That's the insider mechanic. Garden centers don't sell these because there's no repeat purchase in a plant that propagates itself for free forever. Plant the bulbs 2 inches deep in a container at least 12 inches across. Harvest the green shoots continuously from early spring on and let a portion of the stalks go to bulbil in midsummer so next year's crop plants itself. Year 1, you've got a modest onion patch. Year 3, you're giving divisions away to neighbors because you genuinely can't use them all. My grandfather grew a single clump of these in a whiskey barrel outside Cincinnati starting sometime around 1988, and as far as I know, that barrel never once sat empty. Number 14, French sorrel. This one's the contrarian pick because most people who've heard of sorrel think of it as a wild weed, not something you deliberately plant in a container. But the cultivated French variety, Rumex scutatus, zones 4 through 9, is a completely different plant. Arrow-shaped blue-green leaves with a bright lemony tartness that hits before you even finish chewing. Not sour in the vague way seed catalogs describe it, closer to biting into a green apple with a squeeze of lime behind it. The mistake almost everyone makes is letting it flower, which turns the leaves bitter and tough almost overnight. Here's what nobody tells you. Pinch the flower stalks the moment you see them forming, and the plant will keep pushing tender new leaves from spring through the first hard frost. Give it a 14-inch container with well-draining soil, plant it once, and it comes back reliably for 7, sometimes 10 years before it needs dividing. Number 13, and this is the one I mentioned at the top, perennial chives. Both the common onion chive and its cousin garlic chives, Allium scoenophrasum and Allium tuberosum, zones 3 through 9 for both. The reason this beats what's sitting on a big box shelf is that most people buy one small pot, use it twice, and let it die of neglect, when the plant is actually one of the toughest perennials you can grow, and a single clump divides into 4 or 5 new plants within 2 seasons. Common chives give you those grassy green spears and edible lavender pom-pom flowers in late spring. Garlic chives come later, midsummer into fall, with flat leaves and white star-shaped blooms that taste unmistakably of garlic, not onion. Plant divisions 6 inches apart in a container at least 10 inches deep and cut them back hard to about 2 inches after each flowering flush to force fresh growth. Year 1, you're garnishing a few dishes a week. By year 5, a single original container has usually turned into enough divisions to fill 3 more for free. Number 12, Jerusalem artichokes, also called sunchokes, Helianthus tuberosum, zones 3 through 9. This is the one almost nobody plants in a container on purpose because in open ground it's notorious for spreading aggressively, which is exactly why a container is the smarter move. You get the harvest without the invasion. The plant itself is dramatic, 6 to 8 feet of sunflower-like stalks topped with small yellow blooms in late summer. But the real payoff is underground, knobby, nutty sweet tubers that store in the soil all winter, so the container itself becomes your root cellar. Plant tubers 4 inches deep in the largest container you can manage, a half barrel is ideal, in spring, and don't harvest until after the first frost, which is when the starches convert to sugar and the flavor actually develops. Leave a few tubers behind when you harvest and next year's crop plants itself, no replanting required as long as you keep the container going.
Number 11. Perennial Arugula, sometimes called wild rocket or Diplotaxis tenuifolia, zones 4 through 8. This one gets skipped because the annual arugula in seed racks bolts and turns bitter within weeks of a hot spell, so most people assume all arugula behaves that way. The perennial version doesn't. Deeply lobed, narrow leaves with a peppery bite that's sharper and more mustard-forward than its annual cousin, and small yellow 4-petaled flowers that are edible too, with the same peppery kick. The insider mechanic is heat tolerance. This is the one arugula that shrugs off summer instead of bolting from it. Give it a 12-inch container, harvest outer leaves continuously, and cut the whole plant back to about 3 inches if it does start to flower heavily, and it'll push fresh growth within 2 weeks. Plant it once in spring, and by year 2, you'll have a container that's productive nearly 10 months out of 12. Number 10. Tree collards, sometimes sold as walking collards, a Brassica oleracea variety, generally reliable in zones 8 through 10, though gardeners further north grow them as a multi-year plant they overwinter in a garage or bring in as a container specimen. Here's the contrarian angle. Most people think of collards as an annual you replant every year, because that's the only version big box stores carry. Tree collards are a different animal. They grow into a woody, almost shrub-like stalk 4 to 6 feet tall over a few years, with broad, purple-tinged Savoy-textured leaves that get noticeably sweeter after a light frost. The mistake almost everyone makes is planting them like an annual and pulling them at season's end, never letting the woody structure develop, which is where the real perennial payoff lives. Stake the main stalk while it's young, harvest lower leaves continuously as it grows upward, and by year 3, you've got a small, self-sustaining tree that keeps producing greens with almost no new input from you. Now, if you've made it this far, you've already got 5 plants that'll outlast most of what's in your yard right now, and there are 10 more still coming, including 2 toward the end of this list that I genuinely call once-in-a-decade container plants. If that's useful to you, the best way to make sure you don't lose this list is to subscribe. I put these out regularly, and it means you'll have the next one before you need it, not after. Number 9. This is the one I promised you at the top. My grandmother's plant. Welsh onion. Allium fistulosum. Zones 5 through 9, though I've seen gardeners push it colder with mulch. It looks like a scallion, but behaves nothing like one. Instead of dying back after harvest the way a true scallion does, it forms a clump that just keeps expanding outward from the base. Hollow, blue-green stems, mild onion flavor that's sweeter than a green onion and less sharp than a mature onion. The insider mechanic is that you never pull the whole plant. You snip individual stems from the outer edge of the clump and let the center keep growing. My grandmother grew hers in a half barrel on a concrete patio in Zone 5 starting in the early 1980s, and that clump was still being harvested from when I was in college. Plant divisions 4 inches apart in a container at least 10 inches deep. Harvest from the outside in and never take more than 1/3 of the clump at once. Year 1, it looks unremarkable.
By year 10, it's a permanent fixture you'd genuinely miss if it were gone. Number 8. Perennial leeks, sometimes called Babington leeks or wild leeks, depending on the exact type. Allium ampiloprasum, zones 4 through 9. Most gardeners never plant these because leeks are sold everywhere as an annual you start from seed each year, so the idea of a leek that comes back sounds almost fake. It isn't. Instead of forming one central bulb like an annual leek, the plant produces offsets, small bulblets at the base, so a single planting slowly multiplies into a cluster you can keep dividing and replanting indefinitely. Flavor is milder and slightly sweeter than a store-bought leek, with that same silky texture once cooked down. Plant offsets 4 inches deep in a container at least 14 inches deep to give the developing bulbs room, and harvest by taking outer offsets while leaving the center of the clump undisturbed to keep multiplying. One quick thing before we move on. I'd genuinely love to know what zone you're gardening in and whether you've already got any of these growing. Drop it in the comments. It actually helps me understand which of these perform where, and it helps other people scrolling through figure out if a plant will work for their spot too. Number 7. Sorrel's tougher cousin, the perennial spinach known as Malabar spinach. Wait, scratch that. Malabar is actually an annual. The real pick here is Good King Henry, Blitum bonus henricus, zones 3 through 9. This one almost never shows up in a garden center, and that's precisely why it made this list. Arrow-shaped deep green leaves with a mild flavor that sits somewhere between spinach and asparagus. Cooked, it goes silky in under 3 minutes. Raw, it holds up in a salad without wilting the moment dressing hits it. The insider mechanic is that it's a cool season producer that comes back earlier in spring than almost anything else edible you can grow in a container. We're talking harvestable leaves when there's still frost on the ground some mornings. Plant it in a 12-inch container in part shade because it sulks in full summer sun and will slow production dramatically if you bake it. Year 1, it's modest. By year 4, it's one of the first things you're eating out of the garden every March, before the seed catalogs have even arrived. Number 6. Lovage, Levisticum officinale, zones 3 through 9, and possibly the most underused perennial edible in container gardening by a wide margin. Every part of this plant is useful. The hollow stems taste like concentrated celery and can be used as edible straws in a Bloody Mary or chopped into soups. The leaves are stronger still, a single tablespoon doing the work of 3 stalks of store-bought celery. And the seeds, dried, are a spice used in Eastern European cooking that most American gardeners have never tasted fresh. The mistake almost everyone makes is planting it in a container that's too small. Lovage wants to grow 4 to 6 feet tall in a productive year, which means it needs a container at least 18 inches deep and 16 inches wide to develop the root mass that supports that height. Plant it once, cut it back to 6 inches in late fall, and it comes back each spring bigger than the year before. By year 3, you'll have more lovage than you can realistically use, and that's the goal. The most surprising plant on this list is still coming. Number 2 is one that almost nobody thinks of as a container vegetable at all, and it's the one that will genuinely make you reconsider what a container garden is capable of producing long-term. Stay with me. Number 5. Turkish rocket, Buneus orientalis, zones 3 through 9. I want to be upfront. This one is polarizing. It's not commonly sold. It takes a full season to establish, and in its first year, it will look completely unremarkable. What it becomes by year 2 or 3 is a perennial broccoli substitute, dense clusters of small yellow flower buds that you harvest before they open, tasting somewhere between mild broccoli and watercress with a slight mustardy edge.
The insider mechanic is harvest timing. You want to cut the flower heads while the buds are still tight and dark before any yellow shows, which is a window of about 4 to 6 days per flush. Let them open and the flavor sharpens past the point most people enjoy. Plant it in a 14-inch container in full sun, give it 1 season to build the root system, and from year 2 onward it produces multiple flushes of harvestable shoots from early spring through early summer. If you have a friend who's been complaining about buying broccoli every week at the grocery store, this is the video to send them. A single container of Turkish rocket at full production genuinely reduces that purchase for most of the spring season. Number 4. This is the one I teased at the very top. The plant most garden centers won't stock because it doesn't sell on looks alone. Scorzonera. Scorzonera hispanica. Zones 3 through 10. It's a root vegetable in the same family as dandelion, with long, slender, black-skinned roots that taste like a cross between an artichoke heart and a parsnip, creamy, slightly sweet, with a texture once roasted that I'd put against any root vegetable I've grown. The reason it doesn't photograph well in a tray is that the above-ground part is unimpressive: grassy, narrow leaves, yellow dandelion-like flowers. All the value is underground. The insider mechanic is that you don't have to dig the roots in year 1 at all. Left in the ground, or in a deep container, the roots get larger, more flavorful, and easier to harvest each subsequent year. You need at least an 18-inch deep container for this one. Anything shallower and the roots fork and become difficult to extract cleanly. Plant seeds or young starts 6 inches apart, and in year 3, when you pull a root that's 12 inches long and nearly an inch across, you'll understand why this was a prized market vegetable in Europe for centuries before it somehow fell off the American radar entirely. Number 3. Asparagus. I know, you've heard this one before, and that's exactly the problem. Everyone's heard of it, almost nobody actually does it in a container. And the people who skip it always say the same thing: it takes too long. Here's what that argument misses. Asparagus, Asparagus officinalis, zones 3 through 8, planted as 2-year crowns in a half barrel or a container at least 18 inches deep and 24 inches wide, will give you your first light harvest in year 2 and a full, legitimate harvest by year 3. After that, it produces reliably for 20, sometimes 30 years, with almost nothing asked of it beyond a seasonal cutback. The insider mechanic is crown selection. Skip the seed rack entirely and source 2-year crowns of an all-male variety, Jersey Knight or Jersey Giant, because male plants put all their energy into spear production instead of seed set, which translates to noticeably higher yields over the life of the planting. Plant crowns 12 inches apart in a trench 6 inches deep, spread the roots flat like a spider, cover with 2 inches of soil, and gradually fill the trench as shoots emerge. The mistake almost everyone makes is harvesting too heavily in year 2 out of impatience, which weakens the crown going into what should be the most productive years of its life. Hold back. By year 7, a well-established container of asparagus in spring is one of the more quietly extraordinary things a kitchen garden produces, spears pushing up through the soil before most annuals have even been started indoors, year after year, without a single replanting. Number 2, the one I told you was going to surprise you. Fig. Ficus corica. Zones 7 through 11 in the ground, but containerized and overwintered, grown successfully by dedicated gardeners as far north as Zone 5. A fig tree in a container is not a novelty plant. It is, over a decade, one of the most productive edible plants per square foot you can grow outside a commercial operation. The mistake almost everyone makes is treating a containerized fig like a houseplant, keeping it too warm in winter, overwatering it, not letting it go fully dormant. Here's what nobody tells you. Figs want to go dormant. A containerized fig moved into an unheated garage or basement in late fall, watered once a month at most, and brought back out in early spring will reward that neglect with a main crop and often a second breba crop on the same season's wood. Choose a self-fertile variety, Chicago hardy for colder climates, brown turkey for zones 7 and up, plant in a 20-gallon container minimum in well-draining soil and prune to an open vase shape to keep light reaching the interior branches. Year 1, you're establishing. Year 3, your first real crop. Year 10, you have a tree that a stranger would stop and ask you about, producing pounds of fruit that taste nothing like what you've had from a grocery store. Because a fig eaten within an hour of picking is a categorically different food than one that's been shipped. I started my current fig from a cutting a neighbor gave me in 2019 in a 5-gallon bucket, and it's been in a 25-gallon container for 3 years now. Last August, it gave me more fruit than I could use in a week. Number 1. Horseradish. Armoracia rusticana. Zones 3 through 9. And the reason it's number 1 on this list isn't yield or flavor complexity or visual drama. It's that horseradish in a container is the clearest possible proof that perennial edible gardening rewards patience in a way that annual gardening structurally cannot. In the ground, horseradish is notorious for spreading beyond any boundary you set for it, which is why most gardeners either avoid it or eventually regret planting it. In a container, a 20-gallon or larger, at least 18 inches deep, it stays exactly where you put it, and it becomes something else, a managed, annually harvestable root crop that gets more productive every season as the crown matures. Plant a single root cutting in spring, 4 inches deep, and leave it entirely alone until late fall after the first hard frost, which is when the roots have finished converting starches and the heat and complexity of the flavor are at their peak. Dig the container, harvest the largest roots, replant the smaller side shoots for next year's crop, and you've closed the loop on a plant that costs nothing to perpetuate and produces something you genuinely cannot buy fresh in most of this country. Fresh grated horseradish, and I mean root to grater within the same hour, has a volatile heat and grassy sharpness that the jarred version approximates the way a photograph approximates a room. There is no comparison. Plant it once, harvest it every fall for the rest of the time you garden, and at some point you'll find yourself giving roots to people who don't even garden yet, because that's what happens when a plant asks almost nothing and gives back more than you expected. 15 plants, 1 container, years of harvests from things you put in the ground once and never have to buy again. That's the actual promise of perennial edible gardening. Not a miracle, just math and patience working in your favor for a change.